In Washington, D.C., all part of the NAFB Washington Watch. I'd like to say thank you to the M. Thompson Insurance Agency, your American Family Insurance agent in Mondovi, also the Animal Wellness Center of Buffalo Valley, Annabis Silo as well, AMPI, and Growth Energy for supporting our broadcast. I am in Ron Kind's office here in the Longworth office building here in D.C., and Congressman Kind, again, thanks for joining us. Well, you were in Eau Claire here a few weeks back. You've come up with a proposal for student loans. Tell us what the proposal is and why you decided to do this.
Well, first, I think we're reaching a crisis state with student indebtedness in Wisconsin and throughout the nation generally. You know, the typical undergraduate, by the time they finish their degree in Wisconsin, is looking at about $28,000 worth of debt. Huge financial hole. Nationwide, it's about $1.2 trillion worth of student debt, all total. More than all credit card debt today. So it's the next economic bubble, I fear, we're just waiting to go off. So I'm trying to think of ways, bipartisan proposals, to try to alleviate that debt burden and some common sense solutions, such as don't have the federal government make a profit off on the backs of these students with the interest that's being charged. It should at best be revenue neutral. Allow them to refinance like homeowners are allowed to when their mortgage rates adjust. Allow the students to adjust down too. Allow them a greater tax deductibility for the student interest that they are paying, just as we do with homeowners. And then let's not charge them a higher interest rate than what we're currently charging the big banks on Wall Street with the money that they're borrowing. I mean, if it's good enough for the big banks on Wall Street, it should be good enough for our students too. And this way it'll enable them to be able to maintain their payments, not default, not go into personal bankruptcy, and have a lot of that cost shifted onto other consumers in the economy.
Again, talking with Wisconsin 3rd District Congressman Ron Kind, you mentioned the economic bubble with this, and I mean, $1.1 trillion is a lot of money, and if all of a sudden all these students, and I mean, they either can't pay, or I think the bigger concern is someone coming out of college, they got $100,000 in debt, they can't get a car, they can't get a house, they can't do nothing. Where's there really incentive to do much of anything?
That's right, and we do not as a nation want to be shutting the doors of economic opportunity closed for more students. We know how crucial that tech degree or four-year college degree is. Perhaps the only thing more expensive than college today is not going to college today with the job market that exists out there. So we want to be able to make sure that students have the financial means to go to school regardless of their economic situation at home. But obviously with the trend in Washington of cutting financial aid program, again, the Ryan budget that just passed the House called for about $135 billion worth of cuts to the Pell Grant program for low-income students. That's going to shift them into more loans and more indebtedness. And then state aid's dropped off tremendously in Wisconsin, where today, you know, the state's roughly 15% of higher education costs. Just two decades ago, it was close to half. So again, that's putting more of the financial burden onto the backs of these students. And if that's the case, then let's at least figure out a way of working with the loan program to make it financially feasible for students to do it.
You mentioned the recent Paul Ryan proposed budget, and that did pass the House. And again, I guess we've talked about this before, and I always bring it up to everybody in the congressional delegation. If we don't have money for Pell Grants, if we don't have money for roads, if we don't have money for schools, if we don't have money for SNAP, why do we have money to spend overseas? I just don't get it.
Well, it's not just overseas, but the largest spending categories of the federal budget is first and foremost, healthcare costs. We've got to be focused on the healthcare system and what we can do to bring those costs down for all Americans. That's the major cost driver in our budget. And right after that is the defense account. And there are a lot of weapons programs the Pentagon keeps telling Congress stop appropriating money for it because we don't want them, we don't need them. They're Cold War relics. It doesn't make sense given the threats that we face abroad, and yet every year the Congress figures out a way of appropriating money for that. And then, of course, you've known my voice on Farm Bill policy and how I've been trying to shift us away from these big taxpayer subsidies going to large agribusiness. And today, because of Congress's inability to reform a lot of these commodity subsidy programs, we're currently sending $150 million a year to subsidize Brazil cotton farmers. Now, Brazil. So it's not good enough just to subsidize our own farmers. Now we're subsidizing foreign farmers too. So there's a lot of waste in the federal budget, a lot of categories we should look to first for budget savings before we start raising money off from the backs of students who are taking out student loans, I feel.
You mentioned the Defense Department. One of those programs is the literal ship contract in Manitowoc. When all of a sudden the Navy's like, well, maybe we should cut back. Wow, talk about almost bipartisanship with the Wisconsin delegation. Well, you can't cut something else, but not that. Isn't that really the fundamental problem? Everybody says cut, but not my program.
And that's why I think we're going to need some type of BRAC-like process when it comes to weapons elimination, similar to the way we deal with bases right now, so that we're all in this together. And then it doesn't appear as if one state's being picked on versus another state. And that way we have a more strategic, longer-term vision of what our national security needs are rather than what the parochial interests might be. But, weapons programs, one item. I think we have a long ways to go to reform the way we acquire weapons right now. Currently, the weapons systems in the pipeline are $300 billion over budget because of contract revisions and change orders. So this blank check that defense contractors expect from the American people has got to end. We can't afford that anymore. And then there's a lot of force restructuring, too, I think we need to look at, too, in light of the threats we face today. We've got a lot of old weapons bases, especially overseas, that were there for Cold War purposes. They don't, the threats don't exist today. So we're long overdue of reforming the personnel system in our military.
Finally, before we let you go, let's talk about a longtime colleague that you've worked with. Wisconsin's 6th District Congressman Tom Petri. You and him worked together on the crop insurance proposal. You've worked on a lot of other bills as well. Your reaction to his announcement that he wouldn't run?
Well, first I was disappointed, and I told him I was disappointed that he announced his retirement. He's been a longtime friend and a colleague, and I've enjoyed working with him. He's one of those souls around here who does believe in a little cooperation, the need to talk to other members across the aisle, find some common ground, and move forward on some common policy that makes sense for our home state that we represent, but also for our national interests, too. And unfortunately, lately, there's been a lot of my way or no way at all attitude in Washington that's led to the dysfunction and the gridlock and the lack of progress being made. And, Tom's retirement, I think, is going to make it a little bit more difficult, too, because he was one that thought, bipartisanship wasn't a four-letter word, and that ultimately, for any democracy to survive, there's got to be a little give and take.
All right. Well, again, Congressman Kind, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian.
Wisconsin 3rd District Congressman Ron Kind from Washington, D.C. I'm Brian Winning.